The Dominion had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They had conquered 500 species across 300 star systems. Their war fleets were so large that when they moved through space, they blocked out the light of distant suns. No species had ever defeated them. No species had ever even tried to fight back. They believed they were the masters of the universe, and for 12,000 years, nothing had proven them wrong. When their scout ships found Earth, they expected another easy victory. The scout commander was a young officer named Al. He had joined the Dominion fleet because he wanted glory and honor, but after 10 years of service he had grown bored. Every conquest was the same. The Dominion would arrive, send a message demanding surrender, and the primitive species would fall to their knees in terror. There was no challenge anymore. There was no excitement. Al looked at the blue and green planet on his and felt nothing but mild curiosity. His sensors told him that the inhabitants called their world Earth. They had primitive technology. Their fastest ships could barely leave their own solar system. Their weapons were laughable. Nuclear bombs and chemical rockets. They had used such things 10,000 years ago. "Send the standard message," Al ordered his communications officer. "Tell them they have one rotation of their planet to surrender. If they refuse, we will destroy their largest cities." The message was sent. Al leaned back in his command chair and waited. He expected the usual response: panic, fear, desperate pleas for mercy. Maybe some of the humans would try to fight, but that would only make things more interesting. A little resistance always made the conquest more satisfying. On Earth, the message arrived at exactly 3:47 a.m. Eastern Time. It appeared on every screen, every phone, every computer on the planet. Billions of humans woke up to find an alien face staring at them, speaking in a language that was somehow translated into their own. "People of Earth," the message said, "you are now subjects of the Dominion. You will surrender your weapons, your governments, and your freedom. In return, you will be allowed to live as servants of the Dominion. You have 24 hours to accept. If you refuse, your cities will burn." The world went into chaos. Governments held emergency meetings. Military leaders scrambled to figure out how to fight ships that could cross the galaxy. Religious leaders declared it the end times. Ordinary people hugged their families and wondered if they would live to see another sunrise. At the United Nations building in New York, a man named Cole sat at his desk and read the alien message for the 5th time. He was 43 years old, a career diplomat who had spent 20 years handling international disputes. He was good at his job, but nobody important. Just a mid-level bureaucrat who happened to be on the night shift when the aliens arrived. Had missed his daughter's 10th birthday party to work this shift. He had promised her he would be there, but his supervisor had called in sick, and someone had to cover. Now he sat alone in a dark office, reading a message from creatures who wanted to enslave his entire species. He thought about his daughter, Sophie. She was probably asleep right now, dreaming about the birthday cake she had eaten without him. He thought about his wife, Maria, who had been so angry when he said he couldn't make it to the party. He thought about all the ordinary, beautiful, frustrating things that made up his life on this little planet. And then he thought about what the aliens were asking him to do: surrender, give up, become a slave. Cole was not a hero. He was not a soldier or a leader. He was just a tired man who had missed his daughter's birthday and was now being told that everything he loved would be taken away. Something inside him snapped. He pulled up his computer and began typing a response to the alien message. His hands were shaking, but his words were clear. "To the Dominion, we have received your message. We decline your offer. Earth will not surrender. Furthermore, if you do not remove your vessels from our solar system within 24 hours, we will consider it an act of war and respond with all the force we can bring to bear. This is not a negotiation. This is our answer." He read it twice, then he hit send. 5 minutes later, his phone began ringing. It was the Secretary General of the United Nations, demanding to know who had sent an unauthorized response to the aliens, explained what he had done. There was a long silence on the other end. "You may have just killed us all," the Secretary General said. "Maybe," replied, "but at least we won't die on our knees." In orbit above Earth, Al received the human response. He read it 3 times because he could not believe what he was seeing. In 300 years of service, across dozens of conquered worlds, no species had ever refused the Dominion's demands. Not one. He showed the message to his officers. They laughed. They thought it was a joke, some desperate attempt at defiance that would crumble the moment the first missiles fell. "They are insane," one officer said. "They have nothing. No fleet, no shields, no weapons that could scratch our ships. Why would they refuse?" Al did not laugh. He stared at the message and felt something strange in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was unease. For the first time in his career, he was looking at an enemy he did not understand. "Prepare the bombardment fleet," he ordered. "If they want a war, we will give them one." 12 hours later, the first missiles struck Earth. Ares was hit first. The city vanished in a ball of fire that could be seen from space. Tokyo was next, then Lagos, then Cairo. In the span of 20 minutes, 4 of humanity's greatest cities were reduced to ash and rubble. 47 million people died in the first hour of the war. The expected surrender after that. They expected the humans to fall to their knees and beg for mercy, the way every other species had done. They positioned their ships in orbit and waited for the white flag. It never came. Instead, Earth went silent, the radio signals stopped, the satellites went dark, the humans seemed to disappear. Al sat in his command chair and stared at the silent planet below. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. This was not how conquests were supposed to go. The prey was supposed to run or surrender. It was not supposed to go quiet and wait. "What are they doing?" he asked his officers. Nobody had an answer. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a bunker that had been built to survive nuclear war, the leaders of Earth gathered around a table and made a decision. They would not surrender. They would not negotiate. They would fight with everything they had, and if they died, they would die free. Admiral Laura, the highest-ranking military officer left alive, looked at the faces around the table. She saw fear, but she also saw something else. She saw the same stubborn determination that had carried humanity through ice ages and plagues and world wars. "We need a weapon," she said. "Something they have never seen before, something that can hurt them." A young scientist named Reeves raised her hand. "I might have an idea," she said, "but it is going to sound crazy." "Crazy is all we have left," Admiral replied. "Tell me everything." And so, while they celebrated their easy victory above, humanity began to plan its revenge below. The bunker under the Rocky Mountains had been built 50 years ago to protect American leaders from nuclear war. It was designed to hold 500 people for up to 2 years. Now it held 3,000 survivors, and supplies were already running low. Admiral Laura stood at the command table and looked at the holographic display of Earth. Red dots covered the map, each one marking a destroyed city or a landing zone. There were so many red dots that the blue of the oceans was almost invisible. "How many did we lose?" she asked. General, a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes, checked his tablet. "Current estimates put civilian casualties at 62 million. Military losses are harder to count, but we have lost most of our surface fleet and about 40% of our ground forces." 62 million people. Let the number sink into her mind. 62 million mothers and fathers and children gone in the span of a few hours, and they had not even used their full strength yet. "What do we have left?" she asked. "Not much," admitted. "A few submarines, some aircraft hidden in bunkers, scattered ground units around the world. The orbital defense platforms were destroyed in the first wave." Nodded slowly. It was worse than she had expected, but not as bad as she had feared. They still had people. They still had fighters. And as long as humans were alive, there was still hope. "Where is Dr. Reeves?" she asked. "Lab 7 said. She has not slept in 3 days. Walked through the narrow corridors of the bunker until she reached Lab 7. Inside, a woman in a white coat stood in front of a massive whiteboard covered with equations. Her brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But when she turned to face, her eyes were bright with excitement. "Admiral," Reeves said, "I think I have something." "Tell me." Pointed to the equations on the board. "The shields are impressive. They can stop nuclear weapons, missiles, even directed energy beams, but they have a weakness." Leaned forward. "What weakness?" "They operate on a specific energy frequency. All technology uses the same frequency. It is like a fingerprint that runs through everything they build." Grabbed a marker and drew a wave pattern on the board. "If we can match that frequency and then invert it, we can create a pulse that will collapse their shields completely." "You can turn off their shields." "Not just turn them off," said with a thin smile. "Make them explode. Every ship, every weapon, every piece of technology in range will tear itself apart." Stared at the equations. She did not understand most of them, but she understood what was saying. A weapon that could destroy shields. A weapon that could give humanity a fighting chance. "How long to build it?" she asked. Smile faded. "That is the problem. I need materials we do not have. I need equipment that was destroyed in the bombardment. If everything goes perfectly, I could have a working prototype in 6 months." "We do not have 6 months," said. "They are landing ground troops right now. If we wait 6 months, there will be no one left to save." "I know," rubbed her eyes, "I know, but I cannot change the laws of physics." Put her hand on the young scientist's shoulder. "You have 3 weeks, find a way." She turned and walked out of the lab, leaving alone with her impossible task. Above the surface, they were growing impatient. Commander Al had expected the humans to surrender after the bombardment. When they did not, he ordered his ground forces to deploy and hunt down the survivors. 200,000 soldiers landed on Earth in the first wave. They were the elite warriors of the Dominion, veterans of 100 conquests. Each one was armed with plasma rifles that could cut through steel and armor that could stop any human weapon. They expected to find a broken, frightened species hiding in ruins. What they found was something very different. The first patrol to land in the Appalachian Mountains was ambushed within an hour. Human fighters emerged from the trees like ghosts, firing old rifles and throwing homemade explosives. The armor held against most attacks, but the humans were not trying to kill them all. They were trying to slow them down. By the time the patrol fought its way out of the ambush, 6 soldiers were dead and a dozen more were wounded. The humans had lost twice that number, but they had bought time. Time for other survivors to escape. Time for messages to be sent. Time for plans to be made. Al received the report and felt that strange unease again. 6 dead. It was nothing compared to the millions they had killed. But no species had ever killed even one soldier in open combat before. "Find them," he ordered his generals. "Find them and destroy them." In a small town in Kansas, a man named Daniel Wright gathered the survivors of his community in the basement of an old church. There were 47 of them, mostly old people and children. The young men and women had gone to fight or had been killed in the bombardment. Daniel was a farmer. He had never fired a gun at anything but deer and coyotes. But when the scouts appeared on the horizon, he knew what he had to do. "They are coming," he told the group. "We can run or we can fight. If we run, they will catch us eventually. If we fight, some of us will die, but we will take some of them with us." An old woman named stood up. She was 80 years old and had lived through wars and famines and disasters. "I am too old to run," she said. "Give me a gun." One by one, the others stood up. The children were sent to hide in the deepest part of the basement. The adults took whatever weapons they could find: hunting rifles, kitchen knives, farming tools. When the patrol arrived, they found a town that looked empty. They spread out to search the buildings, expecting no resistance. Daniel waited until they were in the open. Then he fired. The first shot hit a soldier in the gap between his helmet and his armor. The alien fell without a sound. The others turned, raising their weapons, but by then the rest of the townspeople were firing too. The battle lasted 12 minutes. When it was over, 8 soldiers were dead. So were 31 humans, including, who had refused to retreat even when the aliens closed in on her position. Daniel Wright survived with a wound in his leg and a burn on his arm. He gathered the 16 survivors and led them into the wilderness, carrying the children on their backs. Behind them, the church burned, but they had learned something important. These humans would not go quietly. Back in the bunker, Admiral received reports from around the world. Humans were fighting everywhere. In the ruins of London, a group of survivors had lured a squad into a subway tunnel and collapsed it on their heads. In the mountains of Japan, an old soldier had used his knowledge of the terrain to lead attacks on alien supply lines. In the jungles of Brazil, a community of refugees had set traps that killed dozens of scouts. None of these victories would win the war. The humans were dying faster than they were killing, but they were fighting, they were resisting, they were refusing to give up. Looked at the reports and felt something stir in her chest. It was pride. These were her people, these farmers and teachers and shopkeepers who had picked up weapons and fought against impossible odds. They might all die, but they would die as warriors. "Any word from Dr. Reeves?" she asked. "She says she needs another week," replied. "Does she have it?" Looked at the tactical display. They were advancing on all fronts. Their forces were closing in on the last major human strongholds. In a week, there might be nothing left to save. "I do not know," he said honestly. Nodded, she turned back to the command table and began planning the next defense. They would hold as long as they could. They would buy time for Reeves and her impossible weapon, and if the weapon failed, they would go down fighting. That was what humans did. They fought until the end. In Lab 7, Reeves stared at her equations and tried to find a miracle. She had 3 weeks to do 6 months of work. She had limited supplies, exhausted assistants, and the weight of human survival on her shoulders. But she also had something that did not understand. She had desperation. And desperation, as she was about to prove, could be the mother of invention. Sergeant Torres had not slept in 4 days. His eyes burned and his muscles screamed, but he kept moving. In the mountains of West Virginia, stopping meant dying. His squad had started with 40 soldiers. Now there were 11 left. The others had been killed in ambushes, bombardments, and desperate last stands. Every day brought new losses, new graves dug in the rocky soil, new faces to remember when the war was over. If the war ever ended. Torres led his squad through a narrow valley as the sun began to set. They moved in silence, staying low, using the trees for cover. Somewhere above them, drones circled like metal vultures, searching for human survivors. "Sergeant," whispered Private Amy Collins, the youngest member of the squad. She was 19 years old and had been a college student 3 weeks ago. Now she carried a rifle and had killed more aliens than she could count. Movement ahead, 200 meters. Torres raised his hand, and the squad stopped. He pulled out his binoculars and scanned the valley. A patrol was moving through the trees. 12 soldiers in their black armor, carrying plasma rifles that glowed with deadly energy. They were heading toward a small village that Torres knew was hiding about 100 refugees. "We cannot let them reach that village," Torres said. "There are 12 of them," said Corporal Jake Miller, "and 11 of us with worse weapons." "I know the math." Torres checked his rifle. It was an old hunting gun that his grandfather had given him years ago. It could punch through armor if he hit the right spot, but only if he hit the right spot. We hit them hard and fast, do as much damage as we can, then scatter. And if we do not make it? Tors looked at his squad. They were dirty, exhausted, and scared, but they were also ready. He could see it in their eyes. Then we make them pay for every inch, he said. They set up their ambush at the mouth of the valley. Tors positioned his best shooters on the high ground, while the others prepared explosives along the path they would take. It was a simple plan, but simple plans were the only kind they had time for. They walked into the trap without suspecting anything. Tors waited until they were all in the kill zone. Then he fired. His first shot hit the lead soldier in the neck. The alien fell, purple blood spraying across the rocks. The others reacted instantly, raising their weapons, but by then the explosives were going off. 3 more died in the blast, torn apart by shrapnel and fire. The remaining aliens scattered and took cover. Their plasma rifles began firing, filling the valley with deadly light. Private Collins screamed as a bolt hit her shoulder, but she kept shooting with her good arm. Tors moved from position to position, firing and ducking, trying to draw attention away from his wounded soldiers. A plasma bolt burned past his face so close he could smell his own hair singeing. He did not care. He was beyond fear now. There was only the fight. The battle lasted 8 minutes. When the smoke cleared, all 12 soldiers were dead. But so were 4 of Tors' squad, including Jake Miller, who had taken a plasma bolt to the chest while dragging Collins to safety. Tors knelt beside his friend's body and closed his eyes. There was no time for grief. There was never time for grief anymore. "Move out," he ordered. "We need to warn that village." On the other side of the world, a different kind of war was being fought. Was 17 years old. Before the invasion, he had been a high school student in San Francisco who spent his free time playing video games and arguing with his parents about homework. Now he lived in the ruins of Shanghai, leading a resistance cell of 30 fighters who ranged in age from 15 to 60. They had taken Shanghai in the first wave of ground assaults. They had set up a command post in what used to be the financial district, surrounded by guards and defensive shields. Every day, they sent out patrols to hunt for survivors. Every night, and his fighters made them pay. "Tonight we hit their supply depot," told his cell in the basement of a collapsed apartment building. "They have been bringing in food and weapons from their ships. If we destroy the depot, their troops in this sector will have to pull back to resupply." "How do we get through the shields?" asked an old man named Mr., who had been a history teacher before the war. Smiled, it was not a happy smile. "We do not go through, we go under." The sewers of Shanghai were ancient and vast. They had not bothered to map them because they did not think humans would be crazy enough to crawl through kilometers of filthy tunnels. They were wrong. Led his team through the darkness, wading through water that smelled of things he did not want to think about. They moved in silence, using small flashlights that barely cut through the blackness. Above them, they could hear the heavy footsteps of patrols. After 3 hours, they reached a point directly beneath the supply depot, checked his watch. They had 2 minutes before the guards changed shifts. "Plant the charges," he whispered. His fighters worked quickly, attaching explosives to the ceiling of the tunnel. They had made the bombs themselves, using materials scavenged from construction sites and chemical plants. They were ugly and unreliable, but they packed enough power to level a building. Waited until the last charge was in place. Then he led his team back the way they had come, unspooling wire behind them. When they were a safe distance away, he handed the detonator to Mr. "You should do it," he said. "You lost your whole family in the bombardment." The old man took the device with trembling hands. His wife, his children, all gone in a flash of alien fire. For 3 weeks, he had been looking for a way to make them feel even a fraction of his pain. He pressed the button. The explosion was massive. The ground shook, and they could hear the roar of collapsing buildings even from their position in the sewers. When they finally emerged onto the surface, they saw a pillar of smoke rising into the night sky where the supply depot used to be. "How many did we get?" someone asked. "Did not know, dozens probably, maybe more. It did not matter. What mattered was that they had struck back. What mattered was that they knew they were not safe anywhere." In the Australian outback, Foster hunted alone. She had been a park ranger before the invasion, spending her days tracking animals and protecting the wilderness. Now she tracked different prey. The patrol had been searching for human survivors in the desert for 3 days. There were 20 of them, well armed and confident. They did not know that had been following them since they landed. She knew this land like she knew her own body. Every rock, every tree, every hidden water source. They had superior technology, but they were strangers here, and in the outback, strangers died. She picked them off one by one. A soldier who wandered too far from the group, killed with an arrow through the eye. A scout who stopped to investigate a noise, strangled silently in the darkness. A guard who fell asleep on watch, throat cut before he could scream. By the 3rd day, the patrol was down to 12 soldiers, and they were terrified. They huddled together at night, jumping at every sound, firing at shadows. They did not understand what was hunting them. They did not know that it was a single human woman with a bow and a knife. Did not feel pity for them. She had seen what they had done to the small towns in this region. The burned homes, the mass graves, the children who had been killed simply for existing. On the 4th day she attacked. She came at dawn when their eyes were tired and their guards were down. She killed 3 with arrows before they even knew she was there. Then she was among them, her knife flashing, her movements quick and deadly. They fired their plasma weapons, but she was too fast, too close. She used their own bodies as shields, moving from one to the next, cutting and stabbing and tearing. When it was over, stood alone in the desert, surrounded by 20 alien corpses. She had wounds on her arms and legs, burns from near misses, blood dripping from a cut on her forehead. But she was alive, and they were not. She gathered what supplies she could carry and walked into the sunrise. There were more patrols out there, more enemies to hunt, more revenge to take. Back in the bunker, Admiral reviewed the reports from around the world. Humans were fighting on every continent, in every climate, against every unit they could find. They were dying in huge numbers, but they were also killing. And more importantly, they were surviving. "They do not understand us," she said to General. "They have conquered hundreds of species, but they have never met anything like humanity. What makes us different?" Looked at the holographic map with its countless points of resistance. "We do not know how to quit. We do not understand surrender. You can kill us, burn our cities, destroy everything we love, and we will still keep fighting, because for humans, giving up is worse than dying." Nodded slowly. "Let us hope that is enough." "It will have to be," said, "because it is all we have." In Lab 7, Reeves looked up from her work and smiled. After 18 days of no sleep and endless failure, she had finally found the answer. "It works," she whispered. "My God, it actually works." She ran to find Admiral. The weapon was ready. Now it was time to fight back. Admiral stood in the underground hangar and looked at the ships that would carry humanity's last hope into battle. There were 12 of them, and calling them warships was generous. The Defiance was the largest, a converted cargo hauler with steel plates welded to its hull and missile launchers bolted to its sides. It had been built to carry supplies between Earth and Mars, not to fight alien battleships, but it was all they had. The other 11 ships were even worse. 2 were passenger shuttles that had been retrofitted with weapons. 3 were mining vessels with reinforced hulls. The rest were whatever humanity had managed to hide from the bombardment. 12 ships, General said, standing beside her, against 3,000. "I have seen worse odds," replied. When? She did not answer. The truth was, she had never seen worse odds. No one in human history had ever seen worse odds, but that did not matter. They would fight anyway because fighting was all they had left. Dr. Reeves walked across the hangar, carrying a metal cylinder about the size of a fire extinguisher. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been pride or madness. "This is it," she said, holding up the device. "The frequency inverter. I have installed copies on all 12 ships. When activated, it will broadcast a pulse that should collapse shields within a radius of about 50 kilometers. Should asked. Shrugged. "I have tested it on captured equipment and it worked perfectly, but I have never used it on an actual ship. There could be variables I have not accounted for." "What is the worst that could happen?" "The pulse could tear our own ships apart, or it could do nothing at all, or it could work exactly as designed," smiled tiredly. "Science is about uncertainty, General. Today we find out which uncertainty we get." Took the device and turned it over in her hands. Such a small thing, to hold the fate of humanity inside it. "Load it on the Defiance," she ordered. "We launch in 1 hour." Across the planet, word spread through the resistance networks. The fleet was launching. After weeks of hiding and fighting and dying, humanity was finally striking back. In basements and caves and ruins, survivors gathered around radios and held their breath. In the command center, Cole watched the preparations with tired eyes. The diplomat who had sent the first defiant message had spent the past 3 weeks helping coordinate the resistance, sleeping maybe 2 hours a night, eating when someone forced food into his hands. "You should be on one of those ships," Admiral told him. "You started this. You should be there when we finish it." Cole shook his head. "I am not a soldier. I would just get in the way." "You are a symbol, the man who told the no, people need symbols." Cole thought about it for a moment. Then he nodded. "Fine, but if I die up there, tell my daughter I love her." "Tell her yourself," said, "when we win." The fleet launched from hidden bases around the world. 12 ships rising into the sky on columns of fire, climbing toward the stars where the enemy waited. On the ground, people looked up and cheered or prayed or simply watched in silence. In orbit, Commander Al received the report of the human launch with something like amusement. He had 3,000 warships at his command, each one capable of destroying a planet. The humans had 12 converted cargo vessels with primitive weapons. "This is their great counterattack," he said to his officers. 12 ships against our entire fleet." "They are desperate," one officer replied. "Desperate creatures do foolish things." "Then let us end their desperation. Order all ships to converge on the human fleet, destroy them completely, leave nothing behind." The armada began to move, 3,000 ships closing in on 12. It should have been a slaughter. It should have been the final moment of human resistance. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral watched the enemy approach on her tactical display. 3,000 red dots surrounding 12 blue ones. The odds were so bad they were almost funny. "All ships, this is Admiral," she broadcast. "We are outmatched in every way, but we are not outfought. Today we show what it means to fight humanity. Today we make them understand that we do not surrender. We do not give up. We do not lose." She paused, looking at the faces of her crew. They were scared. They knew they might die in the next few minutes, but they were ready. "Fire on my command," she said, "and make every shot count." The first human volley was a disaster. Their missiles detonated harmlessly against shields. Their energy weapons splashed against defensive fields without causing any damage. They did not even bother to return fire. Al watched the human attack fail and felt a surge of satisfaction. This was how it should be. This was how it always was. The inferior species struggled, failed, and died. Then the Defiance activated the frequency inverter. The pulse was invisible to the naked eye, but its effects were not. Across the fleet, Shields flickered and died. Defensive systems sparked and exploded. Ships that had seemed invincible suddenly became vulnerable. Admiral saw the enemy shields collapse and felt her heart leap. "Second volley," she ordered. "Everything we have, now." The 12 human ships opened fire with every weapon they possessed. Missiles, lasers, kinetic rounds, even old nuclear warheads that had been hidden in underground bunkers for decades. The weapons that had been useless moments ago now tore through unprotected hulls. 300 ships died in the first minute. Their crews did not even have time to understand what was happening before their vessels were ripped apart. Al stared at his display in horror. This was impossible. The humans had no technology that could do this. They were primitives, savages with barely any understanding of basic science. "Raise shields," he ordered. "We cannot," an officer replied, his voice shaking. "The shield generators are destroyed, all of them." "All of them." Every ship in the fleet. Whatever they did, it knocked out every shield simultaneously. The human fleet pressed its attack with a fury that shocked even its own commanders. Captain Tyler Brooks saw his ship taking heavy damage, flames spreading through the corridors, hull breaches opening in the lower decks. He knew the Defiance would not survive much longer. "Get me a course to that carrier," he told his navigator. "Sir, that is a suicide run." "I know." Brooks looked at his crew. "Everyone who wants to live, get to the escape pods. Everyone who wants to make a difference, stay with me." No one left. The Defiance accelerated toward the carrier at maximum speed. Plasma bolts hammered its hull, tearing away armor and weapons. Fires raged through every deck, but the ship kept coming. Al saw the human vessel approaching and understood what was about to happen. All ships, destroy that. The Defiance hit the carrier at full speed. The collision was cataclysmic, both ships shattering in a ball of fire that consumed everything within 1,000 meters. 40,000 died in an instant, along with Captain Brooks and his crew. But their sacrifice was not in vain. The carrier had been the command ship for the Eastern Fleet. Without it, those ships fell into confusion, unable to coordinate their attacks. Lieutenant Commander saw the opening and took it. Her ship, the Houston, was barely holding together, but it could still move. She aimed for the gap in the enemy formation and fired everything she had left. Her attack destroyed the flagship's engines. The massive vessel lost power and began to drift, helpless. Other human ships closed in, pounding it with missiles until it finally exploded. The battle raged for 6 hours. One by one, the human ships were destroyed or disabled. But for every human vessel lost, dozens of ships died with it. When the fighting finally ended, only 3 human ships remained. The survivors limped back toward Earth, their hulls scorched and broken, their crews exhausted beyond words. But behind them, the fleet was gone. 3,000 ships reduced to wreckage and debris. The greatest military force in the galaxy, destroyed by 12 converted cargo vessels and the stubborn refusal of humanity to die quietly. Admiral sat on the bridge of her damaged ship and stared at the tactical display. The screen was filled with the signatures of destroyed vessels, an ocean of death that humanity had created. "We won," she said softly. She could barely believe it. Cole stood beside her, his face pale with shock. "What happens now?" Looked toward Earth, the blue and green planet hanging in the blackness of space. It was still burning in places, still by bombardment, but it was still there, still human. "Now," she said, "we send them a message they will never forget." She turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel, all frequencies. I want every species in this galaxy to hear what I am about to say." The officer nodded and made the connection, took a deep breath and began to speak. "This is Admiral Laura of the Earth Defense Fleet. To the Dominion and all who serve them, your invasion has failed. Your fleet is destroyed. Your soldiers on our planet are cut off and surrounded. You came here expecting easy prey. You found something very different." She paused, letting her words echo across the stars. "We are humanity, and we do not surrender, we do not break, we do not bow. If you want our planet, you will have to take it from our cold, dead hands, and I promise you that will cost more than you can possibly imagine." She cut the transmission and leaned back in her chair. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was listening. Somewhere out there, they were learning to fear. And on Earth, humanity began to hope again. The news of the defeat took 3 weeks to reach the Dominion. When it arrived, the High Council refused to believe it. For 12,000 years, they had been undefeated. They had conquered every species they encountered, destroyed every fleet that opposed them, crushed every rebellion before it could begin. The idea that a primitive species from an obscure planet could destroy their entire expeditionary force was simply impossible. But the evidence was undeniable. The communication logs, the sensor data, the silence from ships that should have been sending regular reports. 3,000 warships gone, 200,000 soldiers either dead or trapped on a hostile world with no hope of rescue. The High Council convened an emergency session in the Great Hall of their capital city. 12 ancients sat around a circular table, their faces grim with anger and confusion. These were the rulers of the galaxy, the supreme commanders of the greatest empire in history, and they had no idea what to do. "We must send another fleet," said Counselor and the eldest of the group. "A larger one, enough ships to overwhelm these humans completely." "With what ships?" replied Counselor Al. "The expeditionary force was our largest fleet. Building another of that size would take years." "Then we take ships from our other territories, strip the border defenses, recall the occupation forces, and leave our empire vulnerable. The subject species are already restless. If they learn what happened at Earth, they might get ideas." The council argued for 6 days. Some wanted immediate vengeance, regardless of cost. Others counseled patience, building strength before striking again. A few whispered about negotiation, though none dared say that word too loudly. While they debated, a small ship appeared at the edge of Dominion space. The vessel was barely larger than a shuttle, unarmed and unarmored. It should have been destroyed immediately by the border patrol. Instead, the patrol commander hesitated. The ship was broadcasting on all frequencies, transmitting the same message over and over. "This is Ambassador Cole of the United Earth Government. I am here to deliver a message to the Dominion. I request safe passage to your capital." The patrol commander did not know what to do. Letting an enemy vessel into Dominion space was unthinkable, but so was destroying an unarmed diplomat who had openly identified himself. In 12,000 years of conquest, no species had ever been foolish enough to send an ambassador to the Dominion. There was no protocol for this situation. After several hours of confusion, the commander decided to pass the problem to his superiors. The human ship was escorted to the Dominion, surrounded by warships that could have destroyed it 1,000 times over. Cole stood on the bridge of his tiny vessel and watched the alien planet grow larger on his. He was 53 years old now, a decade older than when he had sent that first defiant message. The war had aged him. He walked with a limp from injuries he had received during a bombardment. His hair had turned gray, and there were lines on his face that had not been there before. But his eyes were the same, clear and determined and absolutely unwilling to back down. The ship landed in the heart of the Dominion capital, surrounded by buildings that stretched into the clouds, stepped out onto alien soil and looked up at the sky. It was purple here, not blue like Earth. The sun was larger and redder. Everything was different, and yet somehow, standing here on a planet that had never known human footsteps, felt perfectly calm. Guards escorted him to the Great Hall where the High Council waited. 12 ancients stared down at him from their elevated seats, their eyes filled with hatred and curiosity in equal measure. stood in the center of the chamber and straightened his tie. It was a small gesture, but it made him feel more like himself, more like the diplomat he had been before the world ended. "Speak, counselor," and commanded. "Tell us why we should not kill you where you stand." Smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Because killing me would not change anything. I am here to deliver a message, and that message will be delivered whether I live or die." "What message?" Took a deep breath. This was the moment he had spent weeks preparing for, the moment that would determine the future of his species. "1 month ago, you attacked our world without provocation," he began. "You killed millions of our people. You burned our cities, murdered our children, and demanded that we become your slaves. You expected us to surrender. You expected us to be like every other species you have conquered." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We are not like every other species. We are humanity, and we do not surrender." The counselors shifted in their seats. Some looked angry, others looked uncertain. Continued. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your soldiers on our planet are cut off, hunted by our resistance fighters every day. You sent 3,000 ships to conquer us, and we turned them into debris. You sent 200,000 soldiers to occupy us, and they are dying one by one in our forests and cities and mountains." He took a step forward, his voice growing stronger. "You wanted to know what we are. Let me tell you. We are the species that crawled out of caves and learned to control fire. We are the species that survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed us. We are the species that looked at the stars and said, 'We will go there.' And when you tried to take our freedom, we became something else entirely." His eyes swept across the council, meeting each gaze without flinching. "We became your worst nightmare. We became an enemy that will never stop fighting, never stop resisting, never accept defeat. You can kill us by the millions and we will still keep coming. You can burn our world to ashes and we will rebuild and come for you. Because for humans, freedom is not negotiable. It is not something we will trade for safety or comfort or survival." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. The guards tensed, weapons ready, but just held it up for the council to see. "This is a recording of our resistance fighters, the ones who have been hunting your soldiers for the past month. Watch it." He pressed a button, and a holographic image appeared in the air. It showed human fighters emerging from the ruins of a city, armed with primitive weapons, attacking a patrol. It showed farmers and teachers and students picking up guns and fighting to the death. It showed an old woman throwing herself at an alien soldier, knife in hand, dying with her enemy's blood on her lips. The council watched in silence. Let the recording play for a full minute before shutting it off. "That is who we are," he said. "That is what you tried to conquer, and that is why you will never succeed." He stepped back and clasped his hands behind his back. "Here is our offer. Leave us alone, and we will extend you the same courtesy. We do not want your territory or your subjects or your power. We want only to be free on our own world, building our own future. If you accept these terms, the war is over." Counselor and leaned forward. "And if we refuse?" Smile returned, cold and hard. "Then we will build more ships, we will develop more weapons, and we will come for you. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. We will cross the stars and find your worlds, and we will teach you what it means to provoke humanity." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small metal sphere. "This is a memory device containing the technology we used to destroy your fleet, the frequency inverter that collapsed your shields. We made it in 3 weeks under bombardment with limited resources. Imagine what we could do with time and peace." He tossed the sphere at the council's feet. "Consider that a preview. Now make your choice." The council deliberated for 3 days. In the end, they chose peace. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no other option. Their fleet was gone, their soldiers were dying, and the strange human technology had proven that their shields were useless. Cole returned to Earth as a hero. He spent the next 2 decades serving as humanity's first galactic ambassador, building alliances with former Dominion subjects who had been inspired by human defiance. When he died at 89, representatives from over 200 species attended his funeral. Admiral Laura retired to a small house in Colorado. She wrote memoirs that became required reading at every military academy on Earth, and she lived long enough to see humanity's first true starships launch into the galaxy. Dr. Reeves won 3 Nobel Prizes for her work on theoretical physics. Her frequency inverter became the foundation for a new generation of weapons and shields, technologies that made humanity a force to be respected across the galaxy. And the Dominion, the empire that had ruled for 12,000 years, slowly collapsed. The species they had conquered saw what humanity had done and began to believe that freedom was possible. One by one, they rose up. One by one, they broke their chains. 40 years after the invasion of Earth, the Dominion officially dissolved. The greatest empire in galactic history ended by a single stubborn species that refused to surrender. Humanity took its place among the stars, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as something new. They became the species that everyone knew better than to provoke, the species that would fight to the last breath for their freedom. The galaxy learned a simple lesson that day, a lesson that would be remembered for thousands of years. Never declare war on humanity, because humans do not know how to lose. They do not understand surrender. They will fight and bleed and die, and they will keep fighting until the very end. And if you push them hard enough, they will make you regret it. That was the message Cole delivered to the. That was the message humanity proved with blood and sacrifice. We are relentless, we are unstoppable, we are human. And we are just getting started.